So in this video, we're going to have a look at how we can sketch quadratics. Now, sketching is slightly different to plotting. When we sketch a graph, we're actually only looking at the general shape and any key features. So, for example, any intercepts with the axes. So in this first example, we are asked to sketch the curve x minus 3 multiplied by x plus 2. And you might notice that this is a quadratic. So we could expand this and it would look like the following. Y equals x squared minus x minus 6. So we can see that quadratic shape. So the first thing when we're sketching is we need to know the general shape of what our graph looks like. Now, quadratics are either a U-shape or an N-shaped graph. And we are looking at a positive quadratic. So our graph is going to be a U-shape. The next thing I need to identify are any X or Y intercepts. So in order to identify the x-intercepts, I'm actually going to solve the equation. So I'm going to solve when the equation is equal to 0, when y is equal to 0. So in order to solve this, I'm going to make each bracket equal to 0 and then solve. So my first x-intercept is when x is equal to 3, and my second is when x is equal to minus 2. And I'm going to mark these on my axes. And you can see you don't need to use a scale when we're sketching. You just need to pop them on in sort of a rough place where they would fall. The next thing I'm going to find is the y-intercept. So this is when x is equal to 0. So into my equation, I'm going to substitute y is equal to 0. And I could do this into either equation, so the one I've expanded or the bracket one. They're going to give me the same answer either way, that when x is equal to 0, y is equal to minus 6. So once again, I'm going to pop this onto my graph. Now, an extra thing that you could include would be the minimum point. So this is the point right down at the bottom of the curve. And it's actually located halfway between the x-intercepts. So it's going to be halfway between 3 and minus 2. Now, in order to find that halfway point, I'm going to add the x-intercepts together and divide by 2. And this gives me an x value of a half. To get my y value, so to find out where the y coordinate is on my graph, I'm going to substitute this back into my equation. So I'm going to find a half squared minus a half minus 6, and that's equal to minus 6.25, or minus 25 over 4 if you want to leave it as a fraction. So again, I'm just going to sort of show on my diagram roughly where this would lie. So I've got that key point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a nice smooth curve through these points in that sort of U-shaped graph. And then I'm going to label my function at the end so I know what it is. Let's have a look at a second example. So on this example, we have a quadratic in that sort of ax squared plus bx plus c form. And I need the same things. So the first thing we're going to identify is whether this is a positive quadratic or a negative quadratic. So this is a positive quadratic because we've got a positive x squared term. Next, I'm going to find my x-intercepts. Now, this isn't pre-factorised. So in order to find my x-intercepts, my easiest way of doing this is to factorise my equation. So remember, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to make positive 6, but add to make negative 5. So these are minus 3 and minus 2. You could also find these solutions by the quadratic formula, or even completing the square and rearranging the equation. So my solutions, when I set each bracket equal to 0, I'm going to have an x equals 3 and an x equals 2. Next, I'm going to label these on my diagram like so. Okay, next thing, I'm going to find my y-intercept. So this is when x is equal to 0. So I'm going to substitute 0 into my equation. And that's going to give me y is equal to positive 6. So there's my intercept once again. And next, I'm going to find my minimum point. So I'm going to look for the middle between my two intercepts. So I'm going to add those together, divide by 2, and that gives me 2.5. So it's right in the middle of those two values. And I'm now going to find my y-intercept. So in order to do this, I'm going to be multiplying. I'm going to be substituting my x value into my equation. So I'm going to get y is equal to 2.5 squared minus 5 times 2.5 plus 6. And that's going to give me minus a quarter, or minus 0.25. So I'm going to pop that on my little diagram so I can see it. So this is the point 2.5 minus 0.25. And then once again, I'm going to draw a nice smooth curve through these points using that U shape. And then I can label my equation so we know what the graph is. So remember, when we're sketching curves, we need to find our x and our y intercepts and any key values such as a minimum point. And then we use the general shape to sketch the curve.